Hey everyone, welcome to Plants and Politics. So, Democratic lawmaker and former attorney Zoe Lofgren says that an internal investigation of the events on January 6th produced some pretty disturbing discoveries. Allegedly, a Capitol Police official sent a radio communication to officers standing guard outside on that morning, and he told them to be only on the lookout for anti-Trump protesters. So this revelation came up when Lofgren was recently questioning the Inspector General for the Capitol Police. His name is Michael Bolton. So I'll stop right here for a second and just wonder out loud, did he sing his answers to her? And fun fact, Michael Bolton actually had a song called Gina. He's obsessed with me. What can I say? I'm just saying. Check it out. All right, so back to the serious news. Lofgren asked Bolton whether or not he had read the internal investigation report, and she quoted the radio transmission, which was that all outside units should not be, quote, looking for any pro-Trump in the crowd, and that they were, quote, only looking for anti-Trump. So Politico reached out to Lofgren's office for more details, and one of her aides declined to provide any additional information, but they did confirm that Lofgren's office, quote, is in receipt of new documents and emails related to the January 6th insurrection, including materials which brought to light these issues the chair asked the Inspector General about today. The committee is continuing to review those documents and emails and intends to review the relevant recorded audio when it is available. This news comes just a week after we found out that Capitol Police were basically ordered to stand down on January 6th. If you didn't hear about that 104-page report, it's pretty scathing. It was actually authored by Inspector General Bolton. In it, Bolton wrote that leadership failed to prepare despite very explicit and specific threats made against Congress, law enforcement, other members of the public, and particularly the Capitol building, and including a threat assessment that was handed to the authorities 3 days prior to the January 6th terrorist attack, which read in part, quote, the targets of the pro-Trump supporters are not necessarily the counter-protesters as they were previously, but rather Congress itself is the target on the 6th. Stop the Steel's propensity to attract white supremacists, militia members, and others who actively promote violence may lead to a significant, dangerous situation for law enforcement and the general public alike. I don't know how much more clear they could have made it. He also, meaning Inspector General Bolton, found that police leadership directed their civil disturbance unit to refrain from using standard crowd control methods and tools like stun grenades. This civil disturbance unit, this is the group that you see out with Black Lives Matter protests. These are the ones that typically show up on their bicycles and they use them as weapons and they use them to block people in. None of that was done. None of that was implemented. They also had faulty equipment, he found. There were riot shields that were improperly stored without climate control. So, of course, they became brittle and they shattered upon impact. Gee, that's helpful. And then other riot shields he found were locked in a bus. These civil disturbance officers couldn't get to them. That I don't understand, because if ever there was a time when it would be understandable and acceptable to break the window on a vehicle, I would think it would have been that day. Are you telling me that none of those officers could have broken a window on that bus with their batons, or they couldn't have shot them out? I guarantee that if that was a Black Lives Matter protest, they would have all had their guns out. They would have been shooting out the windows on that bus to get inside and get those shields. It's such bullshit. But anyway, a Capitol Police official tried to minimize this bombshell that was dropped by Lofgren. And he told Politico that the Capitol Police Command official who made that statement was just trying to convey that they should be on the lookout for counter protesters, because that's where the clashes usually happen. That's when, both sides come together and they usually have friction. He then said, as if this was an excuse, that radio communication occurred at 8 a.m. So he said it was, quote, well before there were any issues with anybody in the Capitol. And what the hell does the time of day have to do with it? And he said what he said. Clearly, a large number of the people who went to the Capitol that day were violent. They had violent intentions, and it had nothing to do with counter protesters. They fought the police. They didn't fight with other protesters. They were there to hang Mike Pence. Those were their words. They were chanting, hang Mike Pence. They came with nooses and weapons. Jesus, God, they erected a noose to hang people. They came with zip ties. What the hell does that have to do with counter protesters? And 8 a.m., 10 a.m., 8 p.m., what does the time of day have to do with it? This command official, obviously, he has a blatant bias in his mind about who Trump's supporters are and how they behave. He obviously believed that unless counter-protesters showed up, there wouldn't be any problem. Why is that? Especially since there were intelligence reports with specific threats made by specific Trump supporters who planned to attend that day. And there were a ton of other less specific threats of violence aimed directly at Congress. Their inherent bias towards white Republican protesters is what caused the injury of over 140 officers that day, and an estimated $2.5 million in damages is now what they're saying to the Capitol, which some people are saying is a fraction of the true costs of full restoration. They'll never convince me that, number one, they were just trying not to have a repeat of their insane, brutal, violent response that they had over last summer at Black Lives Matter protests, or that they were worried about the optics because of how everything was, framed last summer, or how everything went down last summer. And two, they're never going to convince me that if the roles were reversed, if it was Democrats, and if there were a large amount of people of color out there protesting a second Trump election, God forbid, there wouldn't have been a severe response. It would have been night and day. And you know why? Most importantly, because Trump would have ordered it himself. Do you think if those were Democrats attacking the Capitol that day, that Trump would have wasted hours, that he wouldn't have heeded calls from Kevin McCarthy and others to send troops, to send the National Guard in? It would have been completely different. And heads need to roll over who ordered those stand down orders. And whoever this cop was, whoever this official was who said, oh, just keep a lookout for anti-Trump protesters, that guy needs to go immediately. No, hey, we're going to put him on paid leave while we investigate. No, fire his ass. He clearly is biased. The evidence was everywhere. It was out there in the public sphere. Everyone knew that these people were planning for violence. They had maps of the freaking Capitol, for God's sakes. They had an implicit bias, and that is what caused all of this chaos, all of the violence, all of the upheaval that day. And Trump supporters knew it. And we know that they knew it, especially the Proud Boys and others like them, because they've said so. Because they've said in court that they didn't understand why they were being treated this way all of a sudden when the cops had their back all summer. And no, I'm not making that up. That is what they have said. So they knew, they expected cops to just give them a pass. They knew Trump would give them a pass, and they expected Trump to pardon them before he left office, if in fact he actually got booted out. If I hear any more, guys, I'll let you know. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Take care, and I'll talk with you soon.